Good morning, everybody, and welcome to MS Ireland's webinar on fatigue management with Dr. Michelle Murphy. I want to say a big thank you to my colleagues in the Midwest for organising this webinar, and thank you to Dr. Michelle Murphy for joining us for it. Dr. Murphy is a counsellor and psychotherapist with over 10 years' experience supporting individuals to build resilience, empowerment and connections within themselves and their world. Her specialist area lies in the cognitive and emotional impacts on individuals and families living with neurological conditions. Before I hand you over, I just want to say that we will have questions. Questions can be submitted through the chat box or through the Q&A function, and we will have a small amount of time at the end of the session for questions. If you don't get to submit your question, you can email them to me and I can send them on to Dr. Murphy for a response. My email address is aoifek, so AOIFEK, at ms-society.ie. And just to say, the session is being recorded, so if there's anything that you miss or that you want to watch again, it will be made available on MS Ireland's website in the coming days. And with that, I'm going to hand you over to Dr. Murphy. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Aoife, and thank you to John and everybody at MS Ireland for inviting me to talk about this topic. I'd be very passionate about fatigue and fatigue management, particularly for individuals and families living with MS. So delighted to be here. You're all very welcome. I hope you're all well this morning. I hope you've got a cup of tea or coffee or a glass of water to keep you going over the next hour. And I will just share my screen. Now, so we're going to obviously look at fatigue management for the next hour, and we're going to look at fatigue symptoms, what they are, what the impacts of them might be, and I'm going to give you some information on practical strategies. So in terms of MS impacts, when we talk about MS, we talk about lots of symptoms: physical symptoms, cognitive symptoms, emotional symptoms, social impacts. So there can be a wide variety of symptoms and subsequent impacts, and that can have a ripple effect on the individual, on the family, on the social world. Some of those impacts can be quite physical, which can be easily recognized. There might be a difficulty with walking, there might be a bladder or bowel difficulty, there might be difficulty with speech. Some of those can be quite physical, they can be easily recognized. But some more impacts and symptoms can be quite hidden. So it can be almost like an illness, an invisible illness or a hidden disability. And those impacts can be cognitive and emotional. So then just to kind of give you a little bit of a breakdown around MS symptoms. Now it's just to, I suppose, add a caveat that everybody has a different impact or different symptoms in relation to MS. Everybody is unique. But this is some of the more broad ranging symptoms and kind of the severity of them. So if you want to look at, we'll say up the very top, you know, about 70% of people living with MS might experience numbness or tingling. Come down to the very bottom down here, if you follow the red dot, you might have a walking difficulty. If you move over here to the right, you might experience pain. About 60% might experience pain. Emotional changes could be 53%. Depression could be 54%. Cognitive dysfunction could be prevalent in about 50% of people who have MS. But then a big one here, if you can follow my red dot, about 90% of people who live with MS will experience some form of fatigue. So there's a huge amount here of physical, emotional, social impacts, but fatigue is really one of the top ones. So in terms of fatigue then, and fatigue associated with MS, it very much is a feeling of exhaustion. It's a tiredness, it's a weariness, or it's lack of energy. It appears much more suddenly. It can last longer and it can take longer to recover. Very different to somebody who is experiencing tiredness that doesn't have MS. It's very, very common and it's very real. And this then comes back to that hidden disability. People mightn't see people experiencing fatigue associated with MS, and it can be very difficult to diagnose. It can be very difficult to understand. It can be very difficult to empathize with, but it is a very real symptom of MS. So as I showed in that previous slide, it can affect up to about 90% of people. So regardless of the type of MS or the severity of MS, there's a strong correlation between fatigue and MS. Then if we want to look at what causes fatigue, so there are two primary causes. You've got a primary fatigue and you have a secondary fatigue. And I'll just give you a little bit of an overview about both. So primary fatigue, it's the direct result of damage to the central nervous system. So it's direct damage to the brain or to the spinal cord. It can be caused by inflammation of the immune cells and cells in the brain and the spinal cord. It can be an increase of the cytokine proteins, so those peptides that we have in our brain that generally will always respond to an inflammation within the body. If there's an increase of those, that can lead to primary fatigue. Lesions which can affect the endocrine system. So as you might be aware, our endocrine system is a messenger system that releases hormones throughout the body to try and regulate our organs. And then we've got the demyelination of the nervous system. So that's that myelin sheath. So again, if we just look over here at my diagram. So over here, we've got the protective layer around our nerve cells. And when that becomes a little bit damaged, the cells that travel through our brain to send messages become a little bit more impaired. Messages can't travel freely, and it causes disruption, particularly in terms of cognition and physical symptoms. Some of the research is also saying that primary fatigue can be associated with increased brain activation. So primary fatigue can be caused by how we use our brain and the need to maybe use more of our brain when we are living with MS. And that would be quite common in a lot of MRI scans. People who are experiencing fatigue, it's showing that you're using more of your brain than people who don't. And that could be to carry out the same task. So if I want to pick up a cup of tea, I might be using, let's say, a quarter of my brain. For somebody with MS, what it's suggesting is that you might be using a half of your brain to pick up the same cup of tea. What the brain does, just to kind of give you a little bit of an overview, consists of about 100 billion tiny cells. So if you look over here on these images, this is called Brainbow, that I would have gleaned from Dr. Sabina Brennan. This is a fluorescent dye that is in people's brain, or that has been put into the brain so we can see the neurons, we can see all the tiny little cells that travel throughout the brain. And these tiny little cells send signals every second across the brain. And it's these signals that enable us to move, to hear, to see, to taste, to smell, to remember, to communicate, to feel things, to think things. And each one of these signals is connected to thousands of others. We've got trillions of different routes throughout the brain, which is going to be sending messages. And it's damage to these neurons or these cells that will cause you to have need to find a new way of sending messages. You possibly need to find a new route to send messages. So your brain is working more and it's working harder to try and carry out the same tasks you might have been carrying out before a diagnosis of MS or before a flare-up. And here then what's happening when you're trying to find a new route is that it's taking extra effort, it's taking extra energy, and this can lead to fatigue. So just to show it to you in a different way, here we've got an old London tube map. And if you can see my red dot again, so if we think about this black line here, this black line is sending a message for you to make a cup of tea. And you start at the very bottom here, which is that you're thinking about making a cup of tea and you might go and switch the kettle on, all the way through to the end here when we get to London Bridge. And London Bridge is us having a cup of tea in our hand and we're drinking it. What can happen when our neurons become damaged, the signal becomes blocked. So we might only get as far as here when we're making a cup of tea. We might not remember some of the steps. We might not remember when the sugar goes in. We might not remember what happens with the milk. We might forget where the milk is. And all of a sudden it's blocked. So what happens then is your brain will try and find a new way of trying to get to the same end goal of making a cup of tea. So I might draw on the blue line here to say that actually, right, we need a different way of getting to making a cup of tea. So we might come up here and we might come down here and we might need different steps, or we might need strategies to support us with making the cup of tea. Then in terms of secondary fatigue, this results of factors that may be related to MS, but not directly related to the MS as similar with primary fatigue. So secondary fatigue can be related to other MS symptoms that you might be experiencing, particularly around muscle weakness, stiffness, pain, or tremor, real physical symptoms that you might be experiencing, can have a knock-on effect and cause this secondary fatigue. Infections can also cause secondary fatigue. So infections raise our body temperature, and it's that increase in body temperature that can contribute to fatigue. The fatigue can dissipate or dissolve when temperatures return to normal. Medication can lead to secondary fatigue, so particularly around side effects. If you're starting a new medication, if you're changing your dose, or if you're even changing the time. Now, it's important when we talk about medication that it is always in conjunction with a medical professional. But it's just to be aware that some of these instances can cause fatigue. But also just the sheer nature of living with MS can be quite fatiguing, can cause a lot of secondary fatigue. So lack of sleep or disturbed sleep, and particularly if people are experiencing bladder or bowel difficulties, particularly at nighttime. So if you're experiencing less mobility, that's going to equal less energy. It's going to increase your fatigue. Again, when it comes to heat, changes in weather. So obviously we had a couple of really nice days last week. That can, again, increase people's temperature when they're living with MS, which can increase fatigue. Physical exertion, overheat in a room, anything got to do with temperature. So it's really important that we try and regulate our temperature to try and reduce secondary fatigue. Cognitive impairments and emotional impacts can also be precursor to secondary fatigue. So again, that extra effort to carry out tasks or carry out actions, or even the emotional adjustment to living with an illness like MS. So what does fatigue look like then? So if we're trying to even break that down a little bit more into 3 stages around like physical fatigue, a psychosocial fatigue, or cognitive or mental fatigue. So if we start up here with the physical fatigue, that's very much that I'm tired, I need to rest, I really just feel like I'm dragging today. And this physical fatigue can come from the muscle weakness. So again, those physical symptoms. Your body is working harder than it's had to ever before to carry out the same tasks. Psychosocial fatigue. So this is just that you can't get motivated, you're feeling low, you might be feeling worn out, just don't feel like doing anything. But also being in groups with people or conversing with people can be very draining, can be very overwhelming. So it's that emotional impact and that social impact. So this psychosocial fatigue is very much associated with low mood or anxiety and really kind of struggling with that social environment. Then you also have the cognitive and mental fatigue. So after a while, you mightn't be able to concentrate anymore. It can be very hard to stay focused. It can be difficult to process information. It can be difficult to, recall information. And you might just feel like you're going blank. Or again, coming back to that cup of tea message, you mightn't remember all the steps all of a sudden to make a cup of tea. What's happened here? And it's this cognitive fatigue, as I was saying, it just takes extra effort for your brain to send those messages or to find new ways of sending those messages to carry out those tasks. And it's the cognitive fatigue that's very impacting, and it's very misunderstood, and it's very much an invisible illness, very much an invisible symptom. Then I suppose just try and capture fatigue and MS and what that's like in relation to that primary and secondary fatigue. So this is a really good quote that, a lot of the clients that I've worked with really resonate with. It says that not the tiredness that people complain about after a late night. It's very much a bone-crushing weariness, and it makes you doubt whether you can continue to function for even an hour or more, much less until the end of the day. With all of that going on, cognitive function just goes out the window, and it adds to the frustration. So there's a lot of things going on. You're in the middle of completing a task or an action. You might actually struggle to finish that. You might struggle to see the end of the day, how you might actually get to the end of the day and continue on with, family life, home life, work life, whatever it is that you're going to be engaging in. And it can become very physical in terms of, physically not being able to go on. Then also you see the cognitive piece, worrying about how you might, continue with those tasks. And then the emotional impact, you can feel quite frustrated. And it can also be quite lonely, living with fatigue associated with MS, because it can be quite unpredictable. One day can be, people can be functioning incredibly well. Another day, in advance of a flare-up or during a flare-up, fatigue might be just completely debilitating. And it is that uncertainty that can cause or create that additional sense of loneliness and isolation. These would be some of the common symptoms then when we talk about fatigue. So you might experience a withdrawal from, your current day-to-day routine, withdrawal from friends and family, withdrawal from social engagements, vocational engagements. You might experience a loss of appetite. You might notice that your movement or your speech might become a little bit more slowed. You might experience some irritability or anxiety, crying spells. So again, a little bit of the kind of unpredictability. So that kind of, 1 minute things might be fine, the next minute it might feel very overwhelming, and that can lead to those crying spells. Lack of interest in activities that you would have normally considered important or meaningful or purposeful. Poor attention and concentration. Weak muscles, poor coordination or balance, and that can lead to falls. Lack of motivation, low mood, feeling overwhelmed, as we were saying, leading into the crying spells perhaps. Reduced information processing. Again, the cognitive piece, difficulties with making decisions or problem solving. Increased forgetfulness, poor vision. So again, kind of really tying back into that occipital nerve. Word finding difficulties. You might experience headaches. So it's a wide range of symptoms associated with fatigue when living with MS. And then the impacts of that. So again, really coming back to this feeling about being misunderstood. So again, tapping into that hidden disability, the invisible illness, and again, really almost having to over exaggerate the symptoms to try and get people to understand. That's what a lot of my clients would talk about, that they have to almost be very extra clear, over exaggerate what it's like so that their family understand, or that their professionals that they're working with understand, or that their work understands, or that their social circle understands. So it really is tying into this, having an extra weight on your shoulders, feeling misunderstood, feeling a little bit lonely in this fatigue. You could also experience reduced independence. So again, coming back to maybe some of those physical or cognitive symptoms that you might need support with. So you might experience kind of a reduced independence in your day-to-day routine. Work-related difficulties or vocational difficulties. Again, that's social isolation, maybe not engaging in those activities that you found useful before. You may not be able to physically engage with them due to the fatigue. There might be a change of role within your family. You might experience some intra-relationship difficulties. So, those difficulties in terms of yourself, how you feel about yourself, how you think about yourself, how you see yourself in the world, how you think you now fit in the world. Then also those interpersonal difficulties, so those potential relationship difficulties with others, or maintaining those relationships with others, can be quite complex. And it could lead to also financial difficulties if there's a change in work or vocation. So it's a huge range of individual and ripple effect impacts when it comes to fatigue. But if we want to move on then to how we can support that, how can we manage fatigue? What is it that I can do on a daily basis to try and keep myself as well as I can? We then look at fatigue management. And really the crux of what I do when I'm working with people with MS is really try and tap into this concept around self-management. So it's very much around what you can do to help yourself and give you the education and the information around these strategies. So I would be a big believer in everybody can learn to manage fatigue, and it's about finding what works for you. So in terms of practical strategies, why would I be talking about needing them? So obviously one of the big things is about offering alternative ways to perform tasks that you might be finding difficult. So again, in the lead up to a diagnosis, you might notice things have been changing for you. During a flare-up, you might notice that there's an increased fatigue, and you might need to find different ways to perform tasks because life still needs to go on. You might have a family, you might have a work, you might have a social engagement, that those things still need to go on and you might want them to go on. So it's really important to look at alternative ways that you can complete some tasks. And that's really going to lead into this increased independence and increased autonomy. So again, giving you more control and ownership and autonomy over your day-to-day routine. It's really important to look at practical strategies in a wide range of them, because really what the purpose of hopefully today, what you might see is that there's quite a pick and mix of strategies, and you're going to be able to take them, mold them, manipulate them, and engage with them in a way that's going to suit you, and that you're going to have your own fatigue toolbox. It really helps to make use of those cognitive strengths. It's really about keeping your brain ticking over all the time, really trying to tie into building those those roots, those messages, keep that muscle memory alive in the brain. So you're really tapping into your cognitive strengths. And it's really important to recognize what you're still performing well, what you're doing well, or what you find interesting, because using that approach is going to help you develop strategies that's going to work for you. So in terms of maybe looking at the first step when we talk about fatigue management, what I would always do with people that I'm working with is the first thing is always going to be identifying what your triggers are. Because until you identify what your triggers are, you're going to find it very difficult to develop strategies or adopt strategies to support it. So a way to identify triggers would be to start developing a fatigue diary. And really what a fatigue diary is doing is it's just going to be logging your daily activity, your rest, and your fatigue levels. And the purpose for it is to develop and determine patterns of behavior that can contribute to fatigue. Because it's only until we start writing things down that we might actually be able to see that, you know, our morning routine might suit us best, or our evening routine is working better for us, or we did too many things in the afternoon. And it's really about trying to look at those patterns and see if we can make changes. It's really important when you're completing a fatigue diary to complete it on the good days as well as the bad days, because it's really about trying to look at the patterns, trying to look at those good days, it's trying to see what's going on then in the bad days. And it's also about recognizing those good days when we're all feeling well. We might have a surge in energy, we might feel a little bit more engaged with activities, and sometimes we might actually end up doing a bit too much. And the knock-on effect of that then could be feeling more fatigued the next day, and that tying in with those kind of bad days. So it's really about looking at the good days, the bad days, to try and find a balance. And really any type of diary will do. So it could be, you know, a physical diary, it could be notes on your phone, it could be you dictating into something, it could be, you know, colored stars on a notice board. It's going to be whatever works for you. But it's important that you find a way that you can identify what your activity, your rest, and your fatigue levels are. Normally when I'm working with people, I say to do this for at least 2 weeks. So every day for 2 weeks, because that can really help get a good understanding. And then what I would always say is to try and keep it built into a routine. So I would always suggest when I'm working with clients with MS is, you know, if it becomes a habit, start logging it every day in a way that, you know, fatigue levels even at the end of the evening were 7, could be a 3, you woke up today feeling an 8, you woke up today feeling a 2. And, you know, it can be very quick, but it's just something to get you thinking about fatigue. But to give you just a little bit of an example, here I've just got 3 different activities on 3 different days. So we've got a day, got a time, got the activity, and I've got a fatigue rating from 1 to 10. 1 being not at all fatigued, and 10 being very severely fatigued. And going back to that quote earlier, that bone crushing, not sure I can continue on type of fatigue. So just an example, so on Monday at 8 a.m., this person has woken up, they're having a shower, they've had a slight balance difficulty, and the fatigue rating is about a 3 out of 10. So it's not desperately high, but it's still kind of maybe nearing more towards kind of feeling somewhat half fatigued. Well, what I would probably suggest there, keeping an eye on that morning routine, it might be actually that if you're waking up and you're having a shower and you've noticed that slight balance difficulty, which could potentially lead to a falls risk, it might be that we would look at strategies around that wake up routine. So in terms of waking up, can there be a bit of time before you have a shower, and see if that helps improve that balance difficulty? So it might be that you wake up, that you have a cup of tea, or that you take your meds, or that you have a glass of water, that you have a half an hour in bed just to try and come to. Because sometimes, particularly with people living with MS and already experiencing fatigue, there can be that extra grogginess in the mornings. So it might be that you just need to give yourself a little bit of extra time first as a built-in strategy before you do something physical, and see if that will help improve the fatigue and also improve the balance difficulty. On Wednesday, around lunchtime, this person was going to the supermarket, they were doing their grocery shopping, they were loading the bags into the car, they were finding that the balance was very, very poor, and that it was very much slowing them down. Their fatigue actually increased to an 8. So again, we might be looking at that pattern over a couple of weeks around the afternoon time. Is the afternoon time a time where you're experiencing more fatigue naturally? Morning could be a better time for you, evening could be a better time for you. And it's also about looking at that grocery shop experience. What were you doing in advance of the grocery shop? Was it very cognitive heavy? Was it that you were looking at the list? Did you find going around the aisles quite overwhelming or cognitively taxing? You're then trying to include the physical task of maybe going around with a trolley or going around to the basket, loading it onto the trolley, loading it off the trolley and into bags. And there might be a lot of aspects to the task of grocery shopping. So it might be that A, you need to be looking at changing the time of grocery shopping, or B, looking at ways to maybe reduce some of those tasks when it comes to that grocery shopping. Because it's quite a big task. Grocery shopping is an all-encompassing task with lots of different bits. And it could also be then that, a strategy might be that sometimes you might need to look at online shopping. Friday then, 6 p.m., this person was eating dinner with the family. And again, their fatigue was quite high. It was a 7 out of 10. So again, looking at that, it could be that they're feeling or experiencing that psychosocial fatigue that I would have showed you at an earlier slide. So very much that being in a social environment, having multiple conversations going on can be quite overwhelming, quite cognitively taxing, and you're struggling to try and tune into any of the conversations, and your brain is trying to work really, really hard. So it could be that eating dinner with the family at that time isn't the most suitable, but in the real world, if we have a family, we're going to be eating dinner around that time. So what I would be looking at when working with people with this fatigue diary would be actually what were you doing before eating dinner? Was it a very cognitive heavy day? Were you feeling very physically fatigued? Were you adopting any rest strategies, or do we need to look at adopting maybe a rest strategy before you eat dinner with the family so that you can engage and be part of that social setting? So that's just to give you a snapshot of what it might look like. So as I was saying, it's really worth looking at a fatigue diary over a 2-week period and doing it in a way that suits you. This was just an example to show you, but as I said, you might find colored dots more helpful. You might find just logging the fatigue rating, might be dictating it on your phone, iPad, or a computer, whatever is going to work for you. The second step then is you want to be developing strategies based on those triggers and based on those patterns of behavior. So really, you're going to be trying to look at developing a much more productive routine, and particularly around when you're functioning best. So again, as I've said, morning could be a time that you recognize that you're functioning better, or it could be evening time. If it's evening time, you would be looking at moving your more cognitive heavy tasks to the evening time versus the morning. To-do lists and prioritizing activities can really support this energy conservation, which is what you're trying to do. You're trying to keep your energy stored for when you need it, so that you can use maximum energy for the task that you need it for. And you really want to try and break down activities into a series of smaller tasks. So again, going back to that grocery shop, it could be that, in advance of going to the grocery shop, you might have just doing the grocery list, but actually you might need to go do the grocery list earlier. When you're going there, it might be that, if somebody else was available, that they were putting things into the basket for you, that might help. So breaking it down to smaller tasks and seeing what suits you. You also want to try and prioritize and be realistic with how much you're going to be able to do each day, because you really want to try and factor in that potential fatigue and potential rest periods. And again, this comes back to us having the good days and the less good days. So when we're on the good days, as I was saying, we can be a little bit more determined, we can be a little bit more action orientated, have a little bit more energy, and sometimes we might do a little bit too much. So it's about being realistic with how much you can do within each day. Ask for help with certain tasks if you can. It's really about, recognizing that you are aware of your limits, you're aware of your fatigue, you're aware of you and your body and what you need to do to stay well. So really asking for help, although it can seem a little bit difficult, a little bit daunting, a little bit kind of feeding into that emotional impact again and feeling low about it, really is a sign of strength, a sign of organization in particular, because it shows that you're still actually trying to organize things that matter to you and that are meaningful to you. They're the ones you really want to be engaged with. So it's really not about recognizing that it's not a weakness. You're motivated to stay well. But then to kind of really look at that cognitive fatigue. So again, talking about those things that you're finding very, very taxing. And that can happen all of a shot, or you might notice that there could be kind of some days where you just notice that cognitive fatigue becoming more and more strong as the day continues. Really, when it comes to that cognitive fatigue, it's that brain feeling heavy, that fog, you know, that difficulty with processing information, or you're struggling to remember words or find words. It really is about minimizing distractors within your environment as much as possible. So, you know, if you're going to be, let's say, reading the newspaper and the radio might be on the background, your brain is trying to, you know, switch tasks between reading the paper and hearing something on the radio. So it's really worth kind of maybe having the radio off if you're reading the newspaper. Or, you know, if there's something in terms of being on a webinar today, if there's a lot of distractions going on outside of you listening to this webinar or watching this webinar, is it possible that some of those distractions could be supported or engaged with a little differently? And it's about really trying to create a little bit of a quieter space so that your brain has less to process. Really want to focus on one task at a time. So again, that kind of switching tasks can be very, very taxing on a brain. So stick with one task at a time if you can, or where you can. Repetition can also be really helpful, because again, what you're trying to do is, I suppose, evoke or enact that muscle memory, and you're trying to create certain repeated routines so that your brain doesn't have to think about certain things all of the time. You might want to look at creating associations between things that you might need to remember. So a notepad by the phone is a really good example in terms of taking a message, or a basket by the door for your keys, so that you always know that the basket by the door is where you keep your keys, and that you're not looking for keys, or that you're not looking for a handbag, or whatever it might be. But having certain things in certain places can just help your brain kind of move that into that muscle memory, and you're not having to overthink. Visual or verbal cues and reminders can be really helpful as well. Or prioritizing information, that, so, you know, you're really trying to chunk information. So even in terms of this webinar, it would be worth chunking the information. So really prioritizing the information that you want to focus on. The same if you're in work, or if you're having a conversation with somebody, trying to pluck out things that are going to be really important. And we do that all the time, regardless of whether or not we live with MS or not. But it's just really important when you're experiencing fatigue that you do just take out those, you know, pertinent nuggets. Another way can be adopting memory or attention aids that I'll show you on the next slide. So some of the external aids would be checklists, or a notebook or a diary, lists, so those to-do lists, those memo boards, or electronic organizers. A wall planner or a calendar can be really, really useful, particularly if there's quite a busy household, or if it's busy with appointments, particularly in terms of seeing the neurology team. Alarms or timers, or a dictaphone. So again, kind of there's a wide variety there in terms of physical or electronic. Really work it to what suits you, because everybody's going to be different. Some people are going to find using the physical diary more beneficial than an electronic organizer. Some people, based on the severity of MS, mightn't be able to use a physical diary. So it's about using what works for you. And then these are some exercises that can really just help keep that brain moving, keep it active, and just again, keep that kind of supple, keep that muscle memory going. So jigsaws can be really, really useful for cognitive fatigue. Card games, listening to music, because you have to listen to the melody, and that can just really help kind of decompress the brain, but also still keep it ticking. Same with meditation, word searches, and then there are some apps: memory matching, matrix brain, free flow or attention tests, Sudoku, anything that you might be interested in terms of the apps that are available. And there are a lot of really good free ones. Again, just even for a couple of minutes to engage your brain in something cognitive, it'll keep you building up that resilience against cognitive fatigue. Really, what's important when it comes to managing fatigue, whether that be physical, psychosocial, or cognitive fatigue, is rest. And people living with MS are approximately working on about 30% less battery than, let's say, me not living with MS. But you're still trying to engage in the exact same activity as I am right now. So we're all here trying to listen to a webinar. But you living with MS, you are actually listening to the webinar 30% less battery than me talking. So although we're engaging in the same task, immediately you're already having to work harder to do the exact same task as I am. Your brain is having to work harder, your body is having to work harder. So it's really important that you take regular rest throughout the day, or regular rest during activities. No more than on this webinar. You might need to take a step away from listening for a couple of minutes and come back in to let your brain just decompress. It's really important to pace activities. So really trying to distribute an activity over a period of time and include frequent breaks if you need to. So a really good example of this would be like a cooking task. So, again, no more than grocery shopping. Cooking a meal is quite complex. There are lots of steps, there are lots of bits. There's potentially a lot of, moving around an environment to get all of the elements together on a plate. So it might be that you might start prepping the dinner this morning. You might then leave it and start maybe put the chicken in the oven this evening. And then it might be that you take a break again, and then that you might go back and you might get the potatoes ready. And then it might be that you put, something else into the oven to heat and stay warm while you're trying to dish up. And it could be that actually a cooking task, which can be really important to some people and a real important piece of family life, might be a task that takes all day, spread out throughout the day because it's been paced. But it actually means that the person had the independence and autonomy to be able to complete the task by just engaging in a little bit more rest and pacing. It's also really important to develop a good sleep routine, and that's going to be very individual for everybody. The same old adages in terms of not engaging in vigorous exercise, caffeine or alcohol before bed, or the blue lights, but it's really about what works for you. But some of the more, I suppose, prominent strategies that the people that I would have worked with would suggest would be around those heating or cooling techniques. So again, really trying to keep your temperature regulated in the evening. So that could be that you might have a cooler duvet, or it might be that actually you have a hotter duvet. It could be that if you're sharing a bed with a partner, that you have one of those kind of multi-purpose duvets, that you might have the cooler side, they might have the hotter side. Might be that you might have a single electric blanket under you. It could be that you might have water beside you, something got to do with heating and cooling and keeping your body regulated. It's also about comfort, making your bedroom as comfortable and as inviting as possible. And that could be anything in terms of the, I suppose, redecorating of the colors, the textures that you have in there, but also if there are things in your room like hoist and other medical supplies, if there's a way that they could be incorporated into your environment in a little bit more of a warm fashion for yourself. I mean, obviously during COVID, we've all been spending a lot of time at home, and there's been a lot of work on people's gardens and people's kitchens. And I think it's really important for people living with MS and experiencing fatigue to really spend time looking at that bedroom, really try and make it inviting, make it warm. If you are struggling with sleep, once you've gone to bed, it's important, if you can, to get up and get out of bed. If you stay there tossing and turning, you're not going to be able to get to sleep. Your brain's already going to be too activated, and you're going to be even more fatigued the next day. So get up if you can, move yourself into a different environment. Could be coming downstairs, could be going into another room, could be making a cup of tea, and then go back up to bed when you're feeling tired. If you can't get out of bed, if there's a physical implication to that, it's about then engaging your brain with reading a book, or listening to music, or putting on maybe a meditation app, or soft music, something that you're going to engage the brain a little bit. But what you want to do is you want to make the brain tired. So it's about finding something that works for you. But if you can get up, my recommendation would be to get up and get out of bed. But if you notice that fatigue and sleep problems are persisting, so that real disrupted sleep that you're really just struggling with, it's important to speak with your GP or your neurology team, or even the MS nurse. But in terms of napping, then if it's really important when we talk about napping that we're still including those rests throughout the day. And again, napping is going to be very individual for people, but this is just a snapshot of what the benefits of each type of nap can have for you, depending on the longevity of it. So if we say a 10 to 20 minute nap, it's a cat nap. That's usually a really good nap in terms of building energy and building energy quickly. Having a cat nap means that you're actually able to wake up very quickly and engage in the activity that you were previously engaged in. So a cat nap is really useful throughout the day, and it might be that you need to engage in multiple cat naps throughout the day. And again, you'll find what works for you. 30-minute nap, it can be a little bit problematic because you're already starting to move into a deeper sleep cycle. And after 30 minutes, when you wake up, you feel quite groggy, a bit slow to come around, and it takes longer to see the benefits of a 30-minute nap. A 60-minute nap, though, can be quite beneficial in terms of being able to remember certain things, and you do feel a little bit more restored, a little bit more energized. But with a 60-minute nap, it's still important to recognize that you're still feeling a little bit groggy. It might take some time to kind of come to. after a nap. So if you were taking a nap and you were setting a timer for 60 minutes, it's worth kind of adding an extra 15 minutes before you start engaging in a task. So that 60-minute nap might actually end up becoming 75 minutes because you might need to give yourself 50 minutes to come to. But a 90-minute nap can be really beneficial because you've gone through a full deep sleep cycle, so a full REM cycle of sleep. And here what's happening is your brain has really taken the opportunity to restore itself and to revitalize itself. And it makes it much easier to wake up after a 90-minute nap. So normally when I'm working with individuals, when we're talking about naps, I would always suggest if you're going to be taking a nap is to set a timer. So if you think that the cat nap works really well for you, set a timer for 20 minutes. If you think it's a 60-minute nap, set the timer for 60 minutes, but just factor in you might need an additional 15 minutes to come to. If it's a 90-minute nap, set your alarm for 90 minutes and really try and be disciplined with getting up once your timer goes off. It's also really important about assessing your environment. So again, really thinking about what your environment does for you on a daily basis, or how much work you have to do within your environment, particularly in your kitchen. So if we start at the left-hand side here, you want to be establishing an environment that's easy to move around, that you don't want to have a lot of obstacles in your way, or a really big island with lots of chairs. You want to be able to make sure it's easy for you to get around, particularly if you want to be using a walking aid or a wheelchair. You want to be thinking about where things are stored. So if things are up very high, if they're up very low, what about bench heights? What about entrances? What about the furnishings? Keep items that you regularly use within reach. Items that you're going to be using together, you should really try and store together. Or store, real heavy items at a low level so that you're not overreaching. Keep your work area, if you can, as uncluttered as possible, because again, your brain isn't trying to manipulate a really cluttered environment and try and make sense of it. When you keep your environment uncluttered, your brain has a much softer, cleaner, safer, easier space to navigate through. And really, it's about trying to keep items in the same place if you can. Label them, store them the same way, engage your family with that if that's feasible, so that everybody's keeping things in the same place. And what can be particularly useful when you're looking at assessing your environment is drawing on the likes of an occupational therapist through the community. They can be very helpful with looking at what your environment should be like. It's also important, and I know I mentioned at the very beginning, it's important to recognize that your medication can be causing some of this fatigue, and it's about being aware of the changes that can kind of come up when it relates to your medication. And it might be that you need to plan your activities around your meds and the time that you take them. So if you notice that your morning meds, you're particularly tired after taking them, it might be worth trying to incorporate a rest in the morning, in your morning routine after you take your meds. Same with the evening. If you're taking meds in the evening, you notice you become quite fatigued, it would be worth then maybe looking at changing your nighttime routine to straight after your meds. But also, if you notice that fatigue is really persisting with your meds, it can be really helpful to link in with your GP, your pharmacist, the neurology team, your MS nurse, just to discuss maybe the side effects and if there's any changes that could be made or could be incorporated. But it is to link in with that medical professional at all times when it comes to meds. But looking at your diet, and we all know this already, kind of keeping, I suppose, our body alive with good food, nourishing ourselves the best food possible, recognizing what we eat can impact our mood, can impact our energy levels. We can feel quite sluggish after certain foods or certain meals. Our body is always working to digest what we're eating. So it's about trying to nourish it as best we can. So really it's about trying to introduce hydration. So a lot of water, if you can, a lot of fresh vegetables or vegetables that would have a high intake of water, particularly things like watermelon. That also helps really regulate your temperature, which obviously, as we talked about, can be a trigger for fatigue. Looking at fish and the lean proteins, looking at small portions and eating regularly. And really trying to avoid those no-nos in moderation, processed food, the alcohol, large portions, the sugars and the starches. And again, a dietitian or a nutritionist could support you with a meal plan that might be beneficial and individual to you. Exercise, again, can be really beneficial to support fatigue and fatigue management, but it's about listening to your body and recognizing your own limits, what you can engage in and what you can't engage in, or what you're finding a little bit more challenging. the most important thing is about being some bit active. And you maybe want to try and increase that activity then on a gradual basis. Again, I think it's really important here when you're engaging in activity to adopt some cooling techniques, because again, you want to bring that temperature back down and regulate it straight after an activity. But it can be really useful to liaise with like a physiotherapist or a personal trainer to look at a program, or even, you know, the MS webinars, the catalog, the online catalog that the MS Society have available for everybody. There is a webinar in relation to exercise, and it could be something that would be worth looking at if you want to look at exercise. But it could be anything. It could be a walk if that's feasible. It could be chair yoga. It could be something low level. It could be something high intensity. But again, about doing something that you enjoy, that you can do, and that you're going to feel a benefit from. Again, when it comes to fatigue, obviously fatigue and stress are almost bedfellows. So when we're feeling stressed, we can feel a little bit more fatigued, and that's usually because our brain is overactive. We're constantly in an overthinking mode. We're in fight or flight or freeze mode. So our body becomes a little bit tense and tight. So everything becomes just constricted. So it's really important when we're experiencing stress that we try and reduce stress where possible. And a way to look at that is try and incorporate some relaxation techniques. And that could be anything from your leisure activities and your social activities. So again, really nourishing the body and the mind with activities that you enjoy, that they're purposeful. It has to be purposeful to feel nourished, or they're meaningful. But again, these activities might need to be adapted. You may not be able to engage in them like you could, or even during COVID, we've all had to find different ways to adapt our social and leisure activities. But it's important to spend time on you and think about these activities and how you could engage them. Meditation and mindfulness can also be really useful, because again, you're trying to quieten the brain so that it's not becoming a little bit overtaxed or feeling that cognitive heavy fatigue. It's about just, you know, really trying to decompress. Or and looking at that deep breathing. So like one of the breathing techniques that I would always use is the 4-7-8. So I would just invite you all now maybe to take a deep breath in through your nose for the count of 4, 3, 2, 1. And if you want to hold it for 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and release it as big as you can to the count of 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And just engaging in that breathing exercise regularly throughout the day really just helps bring the brain down, brings the body down, and is what you're trying to do here is you're trying to balance the chemicals in the brain, and you're taking the stress and the tightness and the constriction away from your body and your brain. It's a really, really quick exercise. It's a free exercise. It's easy to do. Everyone can do it. And there's a huge body of research that talks about the benefits of breathing deeply. And again, you might find some other breathing techniques that can be really beneficial to you. There's a lot of them available online. You might like to look at them. You might like to look at some meditation exercises or mindfulness exercises and find what works for you. Well, what else then can you do in terms of linking in with others? So it's really about looking at this peer support where you can, if you can. So drawing on your social network, you know, keeping your social network engaged and engaging yourself in your social network, and just having those connections with people that, you know, where you're able to almost forget about life, and, you know, having those fun conversations with people. I know there's a lot of Zoom fatigue out there now at the minute, but obviously with things changing and moving and vaccine rollouts, there could be potential for meeting people again out in the community. It's really important to keep those social networks alive. But support groups can also be a really useful setting when you're, I suppose, living with MS and wanting to feel kind of, I suppose, part of a network of people who understand what you're going through, or that shared experience can be really, really powerful. Again, you'll find a lot of those online or even through the MS Society. Social media can be a really useful space as well, you know, looking at Instagram groups or Facebook groups in terms of people living with MS. A lot of them available where people are, again, sharing their experiences. Again, you might want to look at the self-management groups. So again, if you look at Facets, which is a fatigue management program that really focuses on how you, in a group setting with other people, can apply different techniques and different strategies to manage your fatigue. And again, the MS Society and the community OTs have been rolling that out in the past, and they're looking to roll that out again. It's a really useful group format. Physiotherapy groups as well, and again, that's been hugely available through the MS Society, but also online programs. So again, being engaged in these webinars, engaging with other people through the question and answer chat, looking at those other webinars on the catalogue of events, and really just trying to learn more about the MS condition, about yourself, and really trying to see how you can take a pick and mix of lots of different bits to keep yourself well. You want to try and seek support if you can, so really asking for advice. So as I said, in particular, an OT can be really helpful when you're looking at assessing your environment or looking at an energy conservation plan or fatigue management plan. And I know in a couple of weeks' time, MS Ireland are holding another webinar with an OT looking at a home and work environment. So that might be really beneficial to log into if you're available. It's also about looking at other useful professionals or other organizations. So again, your GP or your neuro team or the MS nurse who's available, they're fantastic. Again, maybe counsellors or psychotherapists to really just work through some of the emotional impact or the cognitive impact of living with MS. Looking at those community services, again, your physios, your OTs, your speech and language, your dietitians, and that can all be referred for you through your GP. Again, MS Society has a huge variety of resources on the website, and Rehab Group then as well provide a cognitive rehabilitation service in Galway, and that can be facilitated through the MS Society as well. There's also the MS information line, so that number is there for you. So I know the opening hours might be differing a little bit, but you know, there is an opportunity to be able to speak with other people, speak with professionals in relation to your own MS, in relation to symptoms, and possibly able to signpost you. And these are just some useful resources. Again, the MS Society in Ireland, in the UK, the National MS Society, and Brain Health. And again, you'll find a lot more resources available to you when you're online looking for things. And I just wanted to very quickly just touch on caregivers as well. There might be some caregivers here this morning, and they too can fall victim to caregiver fatigue, and that can be very, very common when you're caring for somebody that you love who's living with MS. So it can really take its toll on caregivers on their physical and emotional well-being. And that can be largely due to postponing, taking care of our own needs. Again, might feel a little bit isolated as well. People don't know what's going on the outside, or they don't understand it, or I'm feeling misunderstood as well. And it can lead to a lot of feelings of anxiety and uncertainty about the future, about your loved one, and it can really take its toll. And again, just some strategies, it's really important to try and take rest where you can, and about treating yourself with self-compassion. So again, being kind to yourself, that it's okay to feel anxious or uncertain, or experience these senses of isolation, or experience feelings of guilt if you're looking at engaging in self-care activities. But about being kind to yourself. Reach out for help if you can. That could be practical help, emotional help. Again, keeping your own social supports alive. Family support groups can be really beneficial. Again, having that shared forum with people who are going through something similar, and keeping your leisure activities alive. Really here, what I'm just trying to say is try and keep your own cup full to be able to support your loved one. Then, just as we're coming to the end, what I have here is a fatigue management checklist, which can be just, it's a snapshot of all of those slides. So, it could be that you might want to look at this as a pick and mix. So is it that you want to identify triggers? Is it that you want to look at your daily routine and goal setting? Is it you want to look at time management or energy conservation? Assessing your environment, is it medication? Your diet, is it exercise, stress management? Leisure or social activities? Maybe it's about having a chat with other professionals or linking in with your GP. So it's just a bit of a checklist for you, maybe to see what is it that I might need to pick and mix right now. So then, just in conclusion, and thank you all for bearing with me this morning. Fatigue symptoms, it can be quite silent, and it can be quite debilitating, and it can affect, as we've seen, a whole host of our day-to-day routine, or all aspects of our daily living. In terms of the impacts, can be very unique, can be very individual, as can developing strategies. They become very unique and very individual. And when you're looking at developing strategies, find what works for you and be consistent. Keep those strategies up all the time. They might need to be adapted during, let's say, potential flare-ups. You might need to look at really beefing up some of them, but it's about keeping them consistent. Keep using them, keep drawing on them so that they become habitual. It is important to link in with other professionals. We are here to support you. And sometimes it's about maybe, getting signposted to those various professionals. Most importantly, it's about peer support. Link in with yourselves, link in with each other, share what you know, draw on each other, and that can really be beneficial. That's it. Thank you very much, everybody. There are my contact details if anybody would like to connect with me or like more information in relation to my own services. And thank you very, very much for your time this morning. And I will just stop sharing screen now.
Dr. Murphy, thank you for that. It was absolutely full of really interesting information, and especially that 30% battery piece for people with MS. I think that that's just such important information to have.
Yeah.
And there's so many practical tools there for people as well. So we did have a couple of questions in, but one that I'd like to ask first, I think, is, people living with MS, fatigue for them, they might have been experiencing that for a long time before they were diagnosed, or for a long time. So it's quite normalized to them. So do you have any advice for people in how they identify what is a kind of a fatigue issue versus the tiredness that people might, just general tiredness, I suppose?
I think it can be very difficult, particularly if you don't have a diagnosis, to recognize that it's something more than what it is. But it generally comes down to that almost heavy weariness. It's a bit different to feeling tired after a long day's work, or being out the night before. It's a sense of heaviness, and particularly it's a sense of brain heaviness. You're really just struggling to get through the day. You might recognize that there's a bit of a word finding difficulty, or I used to be much quicker at doing this task. Why am I not as quick doing it now as I used to? And just really noticing those real slight nuances, because that's what it is. It's going to be so minute when it comes to fatigue in advance of the diagnosis, but it's there. It's going to be that weariness, that heaviness, and that brain fog.
And somebody was wondering if you might be able to recommend some apps to help with cognition and memory.
Yeah, so again, it would depend on the person and what they'd be interested in. People that I've worked with in the past really enjoy apps in terms of like Sudoku, but I find the memory card ones really useful. So again, you might have 2 cards and you need to remember where they were and place them in the proper proper way on the screen. And again, I think I had it on a couple of slides. There was something got to do with jigsaws. Brain for Health, I think, was another one. But again, what I would always encourage people when it comes to looking at apps is it's so individual. So anything that you might be interested in. So if it is a memory game, I would actually just be doing a search because you need to trial a few different ones, because also some of them can be very costly. And that's not really what I would be about in terms of recommending. I'd always be looking at what we can get for free where we can, because there's a financial cost to it. It's about finding what works. So do a search on your own apps and see what it is you like. Try them, engage in the free trials. You might bin them. And again, that's where it becomes unique. You might find something else then.
Somebody else was wondering where they might be able to get the 9-pin hole test.
The 9-pin hole test?
Yeah.
But again, it would be a little bit more challenging. So again, you probably need to be linking in with the professionals in relation to the 9-pin hole test. But I would probably be looking at kind of the more localized strategies first.
Great, thank you. I'm afraid we are just about out of time. We do have somebody else who is wondering about your contact details, but they will be available on the recording on the website, or if you want to email me, I can pass them along. So my email again is aoifek@ms-society.ie. Dr. Murphy, thank you so much for taking the time to do this webinar for us. Thank you to everybody who's joined us. It's been a great session, and we look forward to seeing you at the next webinar. Thank you.
Thank you.